October marks the witching season in much of the English-speaking world. Japan too has taken on the Halloween spirit of late. More pumpkins and skeletons occupy retail spaces and faux cobwebs spread over shop walls with each year that passes. The government of Shibuya, aware of the impending throngs of thousands of costumed revelers that annually descend on the Tokyo ward during the season, is currently going all out trying to keep Halloween partiers away. This represents a major about-face since embracing the grassroots partying as recently as 2019. So, as a chill pervades the air and the leaves in the mountains begin to change, why not get in the haunting mood with some ghostly Japanese horror classics? Now, historically, autumn wasn't the primary season for Japanese horror flicks. Rather, it was later summer that saw theater marquees plastered in film titles that promised a frightful time. This is the Obon season. Japan has been celebrating the Obon holiday for hundreds of years before Americans belatedly introduced the word Halloween into the Japanese vocabulary. The holiday is a homecoming for the ancestral dead when people return to their hometowns to welcome departed spirits back for a visit. As a period when the worlds of the living and the dead commingle, the Obon season is naturally a bit spooky. The Japanese film industry saw a chance for some thematic seasonal synergy, and August became prime horror flick time. Now, the movies listed here are a strong jumping off point for those interested in the Japanese horror genre. Really though, these 5 movies, originating from a span of 3 decades, are more representative of the classic idea of kaidan than what we might consider modern horror theater. Literally meaning strange tales, kaidan are stories broadly modeled as tales of the supernatural, which are sometimes surrealistic and may strike us as strange, weird, and frightening. Essentially, they're Japanese ghost stories. The telling of such tales has ancient roots in Japan and was often the purview of traveling priests and merchants. When the civil strife of the Warring States period ended with creation of the central Tokugawa shogunate in the early 1600s, the archipelago experienced a stability it hadn't known for a century and a half. The ravages of wars and its attendant horrors were no longer a daily worry. Such traumatic concepts could be made the object of curiosity and fascination. People would gather to tell ghost stories, often associated with the previous centuries of war or with supernatural dangers. Some events, called Hyakumonogatari Kaidan-kai, would see storytellers attempt to present over 100 ghost stories in a single sitting. Like a samurai-centric version of the Bloody Mary urban legend, it was believed that 100 stories being told would bring about some sort of supernatural event. The publishing boom of the Tokugawa era and the high literacy rates in the samurai capital of Edo led to a flood of horror stories hitting the shelves. The tradition of horror novels led naturally to horror cinema upon the advent of the Japanese film industry some hundreds of years later. And so we have Japanese horror, which, while deriving stylistic and structural aspects from Hollywood horror flicks, is just as much based in the language, tropes, and visuals of kaidan stories, books, and no kabuki plays as on anything else. Scholar Noriko T. Ryder, writing about kaidan, noted the following quote from a Buddhist priest of the mid-17th century regarding the rituals involving the 100 tales. On a dark night, one puts a light on an andon, a paper-covered lampstand. The paper for the andon should be pale-colored. 100 wicks are placed in the lamp, and every time a tale is told, 1 wick is pulled out. Gradually, the room becomes darker and darker. The pale color of the andon flickers in the room and the atmosphere becomes ghostly. If stories continue to be told, it is claimed that a horrible and mysterious thing will happen without fail. Today we only have 5 films detailing tales of the uncanny and otherworldly in this list, and not 100. Still, if you watch these movies, you may find yourself being drawn into that sense of eeriness, of being in that state between wakefulness and dreams. Whether Halloween or Obon, it's always worth a little dip into the filmic realms where men were not meant to tread. Spooky salutations and welcome back to Unseen Japan. As always, I'm Notorious Noah Oskow, and today we're skirting in under the last hours of the Halloween season with 5 classic Japanese horror films to bewitch and delight. These 5 entries will also help introduce you to some of the greats of Japanese cinema, horror or otherwise. As always, if you like what you see here, give us a like, subscribe, or most haunting of all, consider giving us some support over at Patreon. Now, back to the show. Here's a note, as of the making of this video, you can actually stream all 5 films I'm discussing here on the Criterion channel. Unseen Japan is not associated with Criterion, and this is not a sponsored video, but I sure do wish it was. We begin our spooky journey today with a ghost story more beautiful than frightening. Legendary director Mizoguchi Kenji's Ugetsu, called Ugetsu Monogatari in full in Japanese, is considered a classic of world cinema, and helped introduce the world to Japanese film in the 1950s. The film won the Silver Lion Award at the 1953 Venice Film Festival, which was a major get for a Japanese film of its era. Given its celebrated status, it's a good start when approaching Japanese ghost stories on screen, if not a very scary one. Like many great Japanese horror films, this one adapts folklore from a more distant past. In this case, it combines elements from 2 ghost stories found in the Edo-era book of the same name. And for good measure, it throws in a complementary subplot influenced by the 19th century French author and playwright Guy de Maupassant. 2 couples in a rural village attempt to move up in the world during a time of great instability. The Azuchi Momoyama era, in which the final battles of Japan's century-and-a-half of constant feudal war were playing out. One husband, a potter, seeks wealth by selling his wares. The other man seeks to rise in station by becoming a samurai. Their wives stand by their side but try to temper their overreaching ambitions. As war surrounds them, the families are drawn into tragedy, and into the boundaries between the living and the dead. There's something about samurai-era Japan that makes it a perfect setting for a ghost story. And we'll see time and again in this list how the finer aspects of Japanese traditional culture, the hard lines of exquisite kimono, the angular, minimalistic grandeur of traditional architecture, the way shadows play off walls lit by oil and wick, work to give a historical setting a natural sense of the otherworldly. In Ugetsu, the abodes of ghosts exist in a less defined boundary than in some other horror films. Nonetheless, boundaries do exist. Boundaries are a major aspect of traditional Japanese architecture, and symbolic gatehouses, mon, or vermilion shrine gates, which are tori, separate the world of the spiritual and the mundane at religious sites. The sliding wooden doors leading into the palace of a fallen noblewoman feel intrinsically liminal, and Ugetsu plays off these symbolic and literal gateways. Women, both noble and common, are at the heart of this movie. In fact, director Mizoguchi is noted for using the travails of women in Japan as his most persistent theme. Noted scholar of Japanese film Donald Ritchie wrote that the director's major theme is women, their position or lack of it, their difference from men, their relations with men, and the intricate relationship between women and love. Ugetsu presents this theme in its perfected form. Worth noting is that this sets him apart from his contemporary Kurosawa Akira, who had a harder time writing women. Japanese folklore often portrays women betrayed or hurt in life as becoming vengeful ghosts called onryo upon death. But the ghosts herein aren't quite so vicious. Nonetheless, being in the presence of ghosts has a distinctly ill effect on the living. The desires and motivations of our ghosts here are understandable and sympathetic, and this won't be the last time that we encounter such ghosts on our journey today. These ghosts are the result of war and of the ambitions of men. Both our male protagonists seek to rise in station by taking advantage of the state of civil war, an inherently precarious task. Both these men believe this is what is best for their families. In seeking too hastily, they essentially abandon the women in whose benefit they claim to be acting. When our protagonist, Potter Genjuro, is given a chance to rise from cowering peasant to master of a noble house, he quickly gives in to the temptation, in a literal sense. Status is the motivator, but also what causes so much ruin. So is any of this scary? And not in an otherworldly sense, no. But it does portray the darkness and the danger inherent in the human soul. It also shows us just how much can be lost when ambition overtakes familial bonds. As a gentler introduction to Japanese ghosts, Ugetsu is hard to beat. white demon, a fantastical oni in a no-theater mask, looms out of a darkened thicket, blades of tall grass whipping in all directions. This moment, theatrical and chilling, is one of the great images in Japanese film. It is set within a moody horror film in which the grimy reality of human suffering is more a source of fright than is the supernatural, although the supernatural still plays its role. This is independent film legend Shindo Kaneto's Onibaba. Shindo was a disciple of Mizoguchi and would hold him in high regard his entire life. In 1975, he would immortalize his mentor via a 2-hour-long plus documentary titled Kenji Mizoguchi, The Life of a Film Director. But Shindo didn't just learn filmmaking from Mizoguchi. He also took on many of the director's pet themes as his own. Chief among these is the treatment of women in Japanese society. Shindo would focus on this more than any other topic throughout his career. The entirety of the action in Onibaba takes place within the choking claustrophobia of a never-ending sea of tall suzuki grass. Here, samurai stragglers from unseen battles wander in, hoping to find a refuge or escape. Instead, the samurai are picked off by an older woman and her daughter-in-law, ragged peasants reduced to murder to make ends meet in wartime. Their son and husband, respective to the two women, has been dragged off to war. The two women live in a small thatch hutch, itself lost amongst the grasses. Stolen armor and weapons are fenced to a threadbare blacksmith living in a nearby cave. The bodies of those the armor is stolen from are hurled down a deep, circular pit, a visual like a portal to hell itself. When a neighbor dragged off to war with the protagonist's son returns to the thicket, his presence ignites the central conflict of the film. The younger woman is drawn to the man, and they engage in a torrid affair. For the older woman, angry that the man returned without her son, the issue of main concern is actually her livelihood. If her younger partner is drawn away, she'll be left alone, unable to carry out her murderous lifestyle solo. Survival and sexual passion become the twin themes of this film, lost within the cloak of the high grass. The older woman knows that only the threat of the supernatural may now save her. Other direct connections to Ugetsu are to be found here. We see how wars waged by distant samurai lords affect peasants, to whom the casus belli means very little. Such commoners are brutalized by war, but also seek to profit from it. In both films, samurai armor represents a way for a peasant to profit. The only way for peasants to obtain such valuables, however, is by deceit and violence. They must hide in the shadows and strike down any samurai unlucky enough to leave an opening. The lower classes need to resort to their own form of brutality if they wish to survive. But Onibaba is a vastly grittier film than Ugetsu. It portrays not just the vanities and follies of man and woman, but the dirty, mud-caked lower depths of the human soul. Humans come off as barely better than beasts, slinking through the desolation of the high grasses, willing to do anything and everything to survive. These are humans at their most feral. The old woman, protagonist of the film and played by Otowa Nobuko, Shindo's muse and eventual wife, makes this clear when speaking to a samurai who claims he wears a demon mask to prevent injury to his handsome visage. Sexuality and horror tend to go hand in hand, irrespective of culture and location. Most of the films on this list deal with the boundary between passion, romance, violence, and karmic retribution. But the passion seen in Onibaba, dirty and grimy as it is also breathless. French film writer Ilana Lazic identifies the sexuality seen in the film as highly contemporary, its depiction far from the traditional moralizing seen in more conservative-minded horror. Viewers will no doubt see a reflection of the reality of the 1960s and the sexual revolution that was underway in many parts of the world when Onibaba was released. The older woman's assumption that Hachi, that's the neighbor returned from war, wants to marry the younger woman echoes the expectations of an older generation, challenged by a more emancipated youth. She does not simply stand for the conservatism of an older generation, rather Shindo suggests that behind her adherence to these beliefs is a repression of her own sexual desire and a fear of loneliness. In short, a need for intimacy. With its preoccupation on sex, the movie verges on the pink film genre of the era, but thematically and visually it's something more. Onibaba has one of the most memorably eerie atmospheres of any Japanese film I've seen. It's frightening and fascinating. We see echoes of similar ideas throughout these 5 movies, the horrors of war, memories of devastation brought on by a century and more of samurai civil strife. Ghosts abound in these devastated lands, but the simplicity of Onibaba's setting, on the periphery of war in the shadows far beyond society, grants us a starkly memorable film unlike any other. Premiering a mere month after Onibaba was perhaps the most paradigmatic Japanese yokai film of them all, Kobayashi Masaki's Kwaidan. As horror films vested in the traditional imagery of Japanese horror, these 2 movies could hardly be further apart in tone. Where Onibaba is brutal and grimy, Kwaidan is manicured and resplendent. It's one of the most beautiful films of its era, a masterwork of color and set design. In an era of deconstruction, it represents a faithfulness to old forms. A surprise given it came from one of Japan's most rebellious directors. Now, I've already created an entire video about Kwaidan, so I'll spare some details here now. If you want to hear my thoughts at length on the film, just click over here. Nonetheless, it still bears inclusion in this list. An anthology film featuring 4 stories based on local folklore as recorded by OG Japanophile Lafcadio Hearn, Kwaidan is the ideal introduction to Japanese ghost stories. The viewer is treated to so many of the great standbys here. Vengeful ghosts of women betrayed, the icy grip of the Yuki Onna, the Snow Lady, demonstrating the perils of falling in love with the supernatural. The ghosts of wars long past and the dangers of interacting with the dead, the incomprehensible nature of the plane that lies beyond. As with most of these movies, the mood is more eerie than outright frightening. The imagery, however, is like to stick with you for a long time after the credits roll. These 4 stories vary in quality, but at over 3 hours, Kwaidan gives you the best bang for your yokai buck, especially with the incredible third tale, Hoichi the Earless. The uncontested centerpiece of Kwaidan, this story is a tour de force, moving from a visually magnificent recreation of the naval battle of Dan no Ura to the most haunting images of the 4 ghost stories. Hoichi is worth the price of admission alone. For our next entry, we catch up with director Shindo Kento 4 years on from Onibaba. If you want to see the extent to which black and white can be used to provide a sense of the otherworldly, look no further than this tale of ghostly vengeance. Kuro Neko, Black Cat, swims in deep blacks, much of its visuals being more of shadow and limited streaks of light than not. Easily seen as a companion piece to Onibaba, this film replaces the constraining high grasses of that film for the eerie shadowlands of a deep bamboo thicket. The hard right lines of Japanese architecture meld into the darkness, the slight curve of the bamboo reaching through the frame. Silence reigns, broken only by the wind through the rustling bamboo leaves. And in the darkness, a cat cries out. Kuro Neko continues with Shindo's themes of women's victimization and empowerment. The film opens on such victimization, earning this one a strong content warning. The scene in question is unflinching, but not, I think, gratuitous. Sometime in the distant Japanese past, a hush lies over the countryside as bedraggled samurai emerge from a thicket and invade a thatched farmhouse. Inside, they find a woman and her daughter-in-law. A scene of violation occurs, with the samurai both engaging in and watching on with glee. The men leave, lighting the farmhouse on fire as they do. Amongst the smoke of the resulting rubble, a black cat comes upon the bodies of the 2 women. Sometime later, samurai near the Rashomon Gate in Kyoto began encountering a lone noblewoman at night. She lures them back to her shadowy villa amongst the bamboo. There, another, older noblewoman lies in wait. Together, the 2 ghostly women enact their revenge, now in the form of bakeneko, monstrous ghost cats. Gintoki, a samurai returned from war in the north, is tasked with defeating the murderous ghosts, but he is more connected to this tale than he yet realizes. This film follows a long precedent in Japan of accepting the existence of antagonizing otherworldly spirits. Like in many such tales, including those we've discussed here, the barrier between the realm of the living and the dead is a nebulous one. And yet, in Kuroneko, the true source of evil is not the ghosts, but the samurai who wronged them while still living. These men are up-jumped brutes, for whom war has allowed a change in station, but led only to a thin veneer of civility. Beneath this lies a base, rapacious nature. They glory in their ability to use violence to take all they desire. Comparatively, the ghostly women are spiritually corrupted, but sympathetic. Such is the nature of this sort of apparition, and onryo. Onryo are the vengeful ghosts of those wronged in life, and playing a major role in Japanese folklore, onryo are often victimized women. Placating an onryo is often necessary to stop their rampages, enshrining them and assuaging their rightful rage. Kuroneko is also a film focused on class. The samurai are men who have experienced upward mobility as a result of being drafted into battle. While this has improved their station, it has not improved their inner selves. Upwards mobility even affects our main character, Gintoki, played by the renowned kabuki actor Nakamura Kichiemon II. We first meet him as he's engaged in a desperate last stand during a northern inclusion into the land of the indigenous Emishi people. Forcibly drafted into the samurai military, he's disheveled, his body caked in dirt. He's trying desperately to stay alive, running more than fighting, as he's tracked down by a massive Emishi warrior bearing a spiked club. Only luck allows him to come out on top. For these samurai, clothing seems to make the man. Donning the samurai armor, Gintoki transforms from an uncouth wild man, barely distinguishable from the purposefully savage appearing Emishi he battled in Japan's far north, into a staid samurai, taciturn and pensive. Film critic Sado Takao makes a fine point about director Shindo, that as someone from a farmer background, he carried with him the hatred of the samurai class that farmers have long had in Japan.
日本では侍っていうのはヒーローですから、もう立派な侍ばっかり出てくるんだけれども、新藤さんの作品では侍というのはまあろくでもない奴らだっていうふうに出てきますね。
Interesting here is the portrayal of the Emishi warrior. The Emishi are believed to have been an indigenous people who lived in the northern Tohoku region, beyond the borders of the early Japanese state. As the imperial court, based out of Kyoto, engaged in its state building, it conquered the lands of the Emishi, either outright eliminating or assimilating them into Japanese civilization. The Emishi here is shown as a hulking, powerful wild man, bearing a beard much like those seen in images of the still extant indigenous Ainu people. For all this film's portrayal of class struggle, the indigenous character is still a mere barbarous stand-in. So, while perhaps not as wholly memorable as Onibaba, Kuroneko has a wonderfully surrealistic first half. The visuals in this portion of the film set within the darkened bamboo are among the best I've seen in a black and white film. Combine that with intriguing social themes and the classic Japanese horror features of vengeful wraiths and powerful animal spirits, and you have something very worthy of a Halloween season watch. Is there any Japanese movie that more perfectly embodies cult film than Obayashi Nobuhiko's psychedelic, utterly ridiculous comedy horror, House? Few works of cinema can embroach the sheer what-the-fuckery of this strangely beguiling series of half-hilarious, half-startling images. Buried beneath all the on-screen effects that an amateur auteur-turned-TV commercial maven could ever hope to muster is a horror story that's very Japanese, and very 1970s. The story begins as a classic kids in a haunted house style tale. 7 teenage girls, each with only a blunt moniker denoting their primary characteristic, gorgeous, kung fu, prof, melody, etc., visit the protagonist's aunt's semi-gothic mansion in the countryside. The shadow of the warriors, only a few decades past, hovers over the house. The aunt was engaged to a pilot who disappeared during combat, and she now lives the life of a spinster. Her only company is a white cat, creepy paintings of whom cover the house's walls. As the girls settle into the house, eerie things begin happening, and one by one, the house starts to devour the girls. The plot provides some structure, but it isn't the main feature here. More important are the visuals and constant series of effects gags, all of which give the film the sense of a fever dream you saw once when you were sick with the flu in 4th grade. Director Obayashi was tasked by the studio to make a film like Jaws. That is, violent, flashy, and able to bring young people to the theaters.
You gonna sleep well tonight? now.
The 1970s was a real dead zone for the type of film that interested young people who mostly stayed home to watch TV. Obayashi thought a child's mind could better come up with the sort of unexpected imagery that could make for an exciting theater-going experience. So he asked his young daughter Chigumi to tell him about what she found scary. Her ideas, a girl's reflection in the mirror attacking her, killer futon mattresses, an attached head pulled up from a well, became the core gags the film revolves around. Obayashi purposefully created a film that is all artifice. He never allows Hausu to stray into feelings of realism. With garish matte backgrounds, animated visual effects, and a storybook color scheme, Hausu is truly a horror film drawn directly from a child's mind. The strange fixations, jumps in logic, and tonal shifts all stem from childhood thinking, and it's something unlike anything else. Undergirding all the spectacle and silliness is something older. Once again, we get to encounter a Neko, a ghost cat. The screaming red cat, now so associated with posters from Hausu, is one of the film's main motifs, though usually the cat is in white form. The cat seems to share a persona with the aunt, herself another Onryo, angry at the world that left her behind. Ghostly appliances fly about like yokai on parade in some horror ukiyo-e scroll. There's some wartime trauma theming too. Director Obayashi was from Hiroshima. All his childhood friends, he says, died in the atomic bombings. He's on record as stating that the aunt's malice towards young unwed girls stems from anger at those who live in peacetime. Such girls remain unaware of the precariousness of the peaceful life they've lived thus far. The ghosts of the past reside in Hausu, ready to give the unwary of the present a lesson in chaos and horror. You'll likely come away from Hausu with other thoughts on your mind, however, like, did I really just see that? If you're a fan of the experimental, of camp, of visual flair, of 1970s filmmaking, or of horror, you'll be glad that you did. So 5 classics featuring a range of fear-inducing qualities, all great examples of Japanese film in their own right. I hope that you've enjoyed our journey together today and that perhaps you'll use this list to embark on your own venture into uncanny Japan. Alright, thanks for watching this one, minasan. Glad I was able to get this one out just before Halloween was actually upon us this year. I very much enjoyed spending a week watching and revisiting these films for this video. You'll have noticed that the movies featured were placed in chronological release order rather than ranked. If I was to pick a personal favorite here, it's difficult, but it might just be Onibaba. It's definitely the scariest in its own way, but every one of these movies is fantastic. In particular, Hausu will be a movie night standby for years to come. So I'm currently working on multiple videos for this channel. We've got historical features, including one voted on by our Patreon members, and multiple film reviews and analysis coming down the pipeline. I'd love to have you on board for future videos, so give us a subscribe, and as always, thank you to our Patreon members who keep us afloat. Onikiruze! So, see you next time. Mata ne.